The land on the east side of County Road F46 in Boone County, Iowa, had been looked at by 6 different development firms in 4 years, and every one of them had reached the same conclusion. Gently rolling. Good road access. Close enough to Ames to be interesting, far enough out to be affordable. The soil wasn't much, mostly clarion-nickelite complex, which drains well enough but doesn't command the premium of the darker ground further south, but that wasn't the point. The point was the acreage, and the acreage was there. 4,031 acres, assembled over 14 months by a Des Moines LLC called Heartland Horizon Development Partners, signed and closed in the spring of 2014 for an average of $6,100 an acre. $24.5 million, more or less. The principals had done their homework, or believed they had. They had hired a land planner out of Kansas City. They had a concept rendering with cul-de-sacs and a clubhouse and a name, Prairie Crest Estates. Every man who looked at that land saw the same thing. A blank canvas, open ground. The future. Not one of them spent much time looking at the 83 acres on the west side of F46. Stories like this one don't get told much anymore. If you grew up around people who worked with their hands and didn't say much about it, hit subscribe. We're going to keep telling them, as long as you keep watching. Her name was Darlene Schaff, and she had farmed the 83 acres on the west side of County Road F46 since 1991, which was the year her mother died, and left it to her and her brother Dennis in equal shares. Dennis had taken a buyout in 1998, $212,000 for his half, which was fair money at the time, and Darlene had borrowed against her equipment to pay it, and had farmed the ground alone since then. Corn and soybeans mostly. A small cow-calf operation, 12 to 15 head, that she kept because her father had kept them, and because she liked having cattle to look after in winter when the row crop ground was quiet. She drove a 2003 Chevy Silverado with a cracked dashboard and a bale spike welded to the front loader of her John Deere 4640 that she'd put there herself in 2006 and never bothered to take off. She was 59 in 2014. Her hair was gray and she kept it short. She did not own a smartphone. When Heartland Horizon's land agent first started making calls in Boone County in the spring of 2013, he did not call Darlene Schaff. He called the larger operators first. That's how it usually goes. He worked his way through the county plat maps and identified tracts above 100 acres and started dialing. Darlene's 83 acres were below the threshold. She found out about the project the same way she found out about most things, at the co-op, from a man named Roger Tvetten, who ran the county extension office out of Ogden, and who made a habit of stopping in on Tuesdays for coffee and whatever the co-op manager felt like telling him. Roger heard about Heartland Horizon in August of 2013 and mentioned it to Darlene the following Tuesday. She listened. She asked 2 questions. How big? And where exactly? Roger told her. She nodded and bought her diesel and drove home. Roger Tvetten would tell you now, if you asked him, that he did not think much of that conversation at the time. He thought she was probably relieved the developer wasn't interested in her parcel. He thought she was probably going to be a quiet neighbor to whatever got built. He was wrong, but he had no particular reason to know that. Darlene Schaff was not the kind of person who told you what she was thinking until she was ready to, and sometimes she was never ready to. Her father, Harold Schaff, had farmed that 83 acres before her, and his father before him, going back to 1931, when Darlene's grandfather had bought the ground out of a distressed estate sale for $28 an acre and told his wife it was the best $28 he'd ever spent. Harold was not an educated man in the formal sense. He had finished 8th grade in 1949 and gone to work on the farm and never looked back. But he was the kind of farmer who understood water. Not drainage tile, not engineering reports. the actual movement of water across ground. He had spent 50 years watching the low spots in his fields after a rain and knowing which way they ran and how fast and where they ended up. He had a feel for grade that his neighbors sometimes borrowed when they couldn't explain a ponding problem and didn't want to pay a surveyor. He had told Darlene something in the late 1980s that she had written down in the back of a recipe notebook and kept. He said, "The ground east of the road drains to you. It always has. If anybody ever tries to change that without asking, they'll find out." She had asked him what he meant. He said, "Some things are written in the deed, and some things are written in the ground. The ones written in the ground tend to win." She had not thought about it much in the years since. The ground east of the road had been farmed by a rotation of tenants and didn't cause her problems. The natural drainage from the higher east ground ran west, crossed F46 through 2 culverts, and discharged into a seasonal waterway that crossed the corner of Darlene's property before running north toward the county ditch. It had worked this way since before anyone built F46. The culverts were the county's. The waterway was just ground. Heartland Horizon broke ground on the Prairie Crest Estates infrastructure in March of 2015. They brought in a grading contractor from Ankeny, a company called Summit Land Services, with a fleet of Caterpillar D6 and D8 dozers and a project superintendent named Kyle, who had graded residential developments across 6 Midwest states and had strong opinions about drainage that were generally correct in the contexts he had worked in. The plan called for raising the grade of a large portion of the development's central area by 4 to 6 feet to create the gentle rise that would give the higher-priced lots their view. To manage the water that would come off that raised ground, the plan routed new drainage to the east, toward a retention pond near the development's entrance. The drainage that had historically gone west through the 2 culverts on F46 was not in their plan. Not because they had decided to block it, because they hadn't thought about it, because nobody in the planning process had spent enough time looking at the 83 acres on the west side of the road to understand what it received and why. The first significant rain after grading came on a Wednesday in April of 2015, 2.5 inches overnight. Roger Fetton heard about what happened to Darlene's low corner field from his co-op contact the following Tuesday, same as always. He drove out to look. The seasonal waterway that crossed the corner of her property had carried somewhere between 3 and 4 times its normal volume, based on the debris line it left on her fence posts. The low corner, about 9 acres of her best soybean ground, had standing water that hadn't fully drained by Sunday. She had not yet planted. It was April. There was still time. She had taken photographs on Thursday morning, 12 of them, on a digital camera she'd owned since 2008. She had written down the date, the rainfall amount from her gauge, 247 inches, and the time the standing water reached its high point. She had done this in the same recipe notebook where her father's words were written. She did not call Heartland Horizon. She did not call a lawyer. She did not post anything online, which would not have been hard to predict given that she did not own a smartphone. She called Roger Fetton and asked if he knew anyone at the county engineer's office who could pull the historical drainage records for the culverts on F46. Roger knew someone. The county drainage records for that section of F46 went back to 1968. The culverts had been placed in 1971 and documented as part of a county road improvement project that had included a drainage study. The study noted, in plain language, that the 2 culverts accommodated natural west-flowing drainage from the higher ground to the east, and that the downstream property owner, the Schaff Farm, as it was designated at the time, held what the document called a drainage easement of record, appurtenant to the land, meaning it ran with the deed. It had been granted to Darlene's grandfather in 1969 as part of the same road project. It was recorded with the Boone County Recorder. It had been there for 46 years. Heartland Horizon's title search had not flagged it. The land planner out of Kansas City had not flagged it. The grading contractor from Ankeny had certainly not flagged it. The county's own road crew, which had maintained the culverts for decades, had not been consulted. The easement was recorded. It was just not famous. Darlene hired a lawyer in Ames named Patricia Gale in May of 2015, 6 weeks after the April rain. Patricia Gale specialized in agricultural property disputes and had handled drainage easement cases before, though she would say later that the documentation in this one was unusually complete. The recipe notebook, the photographs, the county drainage records, the recorded easement from 1969. Harold Schaff's ground-level understanding of how water moved had turned out to be a legal instrument, properly recorded, sitting in the county recorder's office for 46 years, waiting for exactly this. Heartland Horizon received a certified letter in June. The developer's attorney, a firm out of Des Moines with 4 partners, requested a meeting. Then another. Then a third. Their grading contractor provided an engineering analysis, arguing that the drainage modification had not materially increased flow to the Schaff property. Patricia Gale submitted Roger Fetton's field notes and Darlene's gauge readings and the photographs taken Thursday morning, April 9th, 2015, showing the fence post debris line at 4 feet 11 inches above the waterway's normal channel. The engineering analysis was revised. Then revised again. Darlene attended one of the 3 meetings. She sat at the conference table in Patricia Gale's office in Ames and listened to the developer's attorney explain the revised analysis, and she asked one question. She asked whether, under the revised analysis, the easement of record was being acknowledged as valid. The attorney said that was a question for their engineers. Patricia Gale said that was a question for this meeting. There was a pause. The developer's attorney said yes. The easement was valid. Darlene nodded. She did not say anything else. The settlement was reached in September of 2015. Heartland Horizon was required to restore the original drainage path to the west culverts as the primary outfall, remediate the damage to the 9-acre low corner field including soil restoration and lost crop value for the 2015 season, and record a covenant acknowledging the drainage easement's priority in perpetuity. The remediation check came to $41,300. The grading correction cost Heartland Horizon considerably more than that. Prairie Crest Estates was eventually built in modified form, with the drainage running the way the ground had always wanted it to run. The clubhouse opened in 2018. It is a fine enough development. The cul-de-sacs are paved. Darlene Schaff still farms the 83 acres. She is 69 now. She has not expanded and has not sold, and has said, when asked, that she has no plans to do either. She still has the 12-head cow-calf operation, and she still welds things herself when she can, and the cracked dashboard on the Silverado was finally replaced in 2022, when the truck otherwise needed enough work that the dashboard got done at the same time, almost by accident. She keeps her records in spiral notebooks, and she has added 2 more recipe books to the shelf above the kitchen desk, each one organized the same way her father taught her. Date, observation, source, what it means. Roger Fetton retired from the extension office in 2021. He still stops at the co-op on Tuesdays. He will tell you, if you ask the right way, that he learned something from watching that situation unfold. He said he used to think that the farmers who didn't say much were the ones who didn't know much, that quiet meant uninformed. He was a county extension agent for 34 years, and he is honest enough to admit he got that backwards. Harold Schaff died in 2003. He never saw a development proposal. He never needed to. He spent 50 years watching water move across his ground, and he wrote down what he knew, and he told his daughter, and his daughter wrote it in a notebook. And the notebook sat on a shelf for 30 years waiting for the morning it was needed. The ground has always drained west. Harold knew it. The county knew it. The recorder's office had it on file. The developer had $24.5 million in a rendering with a clubhouse and a name. He just didn't know what he was standing next to.